How did you go about identifying potential companies that you could end up buying?
The biggest impact to that multiple is going to be the type of properties that the business has.
What did you learn in terms of what's unique about financing the acquisition of a property management company versus the way it works in other spaces?
It's very important to understand what you can do and how much money you can spend. The banks don't tend to want to talk to you until you have a business in place.
Well, the fact that a contract is transferable might make you be willing to pay more versus if you have to draft a new contract and then there's the risk of losing the owner throughout the transition.
If you're looking at a property management company that has a lot of brand new owners, that changed my evaluation of the company significantly. Those owners have learned how to switch, they'll switch on you much easier.
What could be some of the mistakes that you could see people not having your background making? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality, and where we aim to bring together entrepreneurs, leaders, operators, founders, and experts in the vacation rental, hospitality, and real estate space so they can tell us about their stories, the lessons they have learned along the way, as well as maybe some of the mistakes they might have made along the way so we don't have to make those same mistakes ourselves. Today, I'm super excited to be here with Gene. He's the owner at EC Vacation Services and Breathe Easy Rentals. We're going to be discussing everything from M&A as a growth strategy, all the way through, what can be done as far as valuation methods, how to look at your P&L, how to have proper budgeting controls in place and systems, as well as how can someone from a different field of life in corporate America through M&A and strategic planning, enter this space and become successful in it. So Jane, very, very excited to have you on. Thanks for taking the time. Where are you taking the call from before we get started?
From Fort Walton, Florida.
Love it.
And thank
Amazing.
you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. So Jane, let me start by a question that it's a little meant to be attention grabbing here at first. So if you were to start this process all over again of making this acquisitions, you acquired these two operations and now you're running them and growing them and streamlining them. But you were new to this industry, right? Now
Yes.
You're no longer new to this industry. Now you've learned a lot, from doing this, being involved. If you were to start over again, this same process of acquiring these operations, and you could do anything differently, and or you could give yourself some piece of advice to the person that was looking at those deals back then, what if anything would you do differently, and what would you advise yourself to consider as well?
Well, that's actually a very good question because, and I have thought about that recently, is the one thing that I would have given myself advice on is looking at the total number of properties that the acquisition has. The larger the group is, it's more appealing because, well, I have more properties, which means potentially more income coming in. But the other side of that coin is the more you have, especially coming from an outside source like myself, I was in other industries. To have more properties means a lot more work to get done and to learn in a very, very quick pace. So I would have almost said or recommended to myself, take a look at a smaller type of operation to get started with, and then grow that from there through acquisitions or through attrition of possible growth of growing the business through other ownerships. So
Interesting. So maybe start smaller, just to test the waters, to make sure that you're not taking on more than you can chew, type of thing, and then from there progressively scaling. Because one of the things that's unique in this industry, and you've probably noticed this already, is that the volume of transactions that takes place in a vacation rental operation for the size of the company that, like, in other words, in any other industry, if you had the volume of transactions that you have, you'd be a much larger company. You'd be a company with many more employees, many more resources. So yeah, the complexity of that side of things is definitely not to be underestimated. Now, tell me a little bit about when you were, well, first of all, why did you even start looking into getting into this space?
So both my wife and I were in separate industries. She was in pharmaceutical and I was in automotive. And we made the decision that we wanted to do something for ourselves. And after looking it through different opportunities, we actually were going to take the side of purchasing short-term rentals ourselves and having a property manager take it. Unfortunately, due to the interest rates at the time when we were looking, it wasn't the best option. So we decided to go into the property management side and start the company that way and start our business through that process. So that's how we got into it. And we're loving the business and doing it ourselves, but it was that's how we that's how we got here is
But
long
is
and
there
short of it.
was there a certain like analysis of you saying, well, these are all the things we could do with our lives, these are all the businesses we could
Yeah.
start, but we want to be in vacation rental property management for a reason. I mean, I get it's because the interest rates were high, so you couldn't buy, so you looked at management. But as far as the industry, from an outsider's point of view, what is it that caught your attention and made you want to make this the next challenge and journey of yours?
So we were looking, we originally looked at hotels and purchasing hotels. And we originally looked at, after that, it was, we looked into potentially doing warehouse spaces and office spaces. But this one made the most sense to us. You still had the communications with the owners and you still had the communications with the guests. And for us, it was all about that relationship building. I mean, if nothing else that I've learned in a short period of time, and or in the time that we've been in this business, is you answer to two groups. You're in the middle of two groups, the sandwich between the owners and the guests. But at the same time, it's all about the relationships. And as long as you're willing to do that, this is a fun industry, and and that's really what appealed to us more than anything was we are relationship people. So that made it much easier to pick this as the option.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I know you looked into a couple of alternatives when you were deciding that you wanted to get into the property management space, franchises being one of them. Uh, could you walk me through the due diligence process that you conducted, as far as deciding to either go with a franchise model or start your own, or you ended up deciding to acquire existing operations, and a little bit of the why behind you ended up deciding the way you did?
So yeah, absolutely. So we were looking at franchising, and part of the franchise was we really just didn't have the being new to the industry, we just didn't have the education behind how to make it all happen, right? How do you acquire that first home? What do you do when you do acquire that first home? What's all of the steps involved? And quite frankly, the franchises help you out in that fashion. They really give you a lot of good information there if you don't have that background. Um, when we started looking at acquiring, though, the business and buying one that was already well formed, you typically will set up a relationship with that previous owner or the seller of the business so that they give you anywhere from 3 weeks to, let's say, 5 weeks of training. And in that time frame, you're getting the same thing that a franchise is going to give you. And so there's no reason, in my opinion, if you're going to buy a brand new, or if you're going to start, a franchise is a good way to go if you don't have the background to support you. But if you're going to come into the industry and buy a facility, then there's no reason to come in as a as a franchise, it's better just to let the new owner or the previous owner teach you how to do it, and then go from there. And that's what we started to learn, is that the franchises cost you a lot of income because they're charging you fees to use them as that training mechanism, that there's no reason to give up that income when you already have an established operations. But again, if you're starting brand new and you don't have it, then it's a one option of many, and you would have to choose which is best for yourself. But in my case, it was, let's buy an operation already in existence and not franchise from there. So,
That makes sense. Yeah. And what's interesting with what you're saying is that, sometimes franchises are very appealing precisely to people that are new in the space because of the learning component that they want to fast track. But to your point, if you have the background, if you have the right background, and you can come in with that confidence of knowing that when you go high enough in any business, they all look the same from like from the top to the bottom. Like it's functions, it's P&L, it's departments, it's inputs and outputs. So tell us a little bit about what do you think was unique about your background that gave you that confidence to say, I don't need the franchise, but also what are some of the things that, because of that background, you've been able to put in place and implement as far as improvements since you started running the operations?
so one of the things that, to give you an idea, so I was a chief operating officer in my last company, and so I was fairly high up there. Grew through my career in running businesses of all sizes. And so I learned the financial side. I know and understand how to look at a P&L and manage an organization. I know how to deal with the folks, and I know how to run a business. I mean, quite frankly, I've had a lot of experience running fairly decent sized businesses. But the one thing that those all did for me, and I think having that experience is very critical. But the one big thing it did for me is it always taught me, or it taught me how to have a team. And no matter how good you are with what you understand, um, I'm an engineer by degree. I understand financials and understand numbers very well, but I'm going to be honest, I don't do my bookkeeping. I have a very good person who does my bookkeeping. I have a very good person who does my accounting, and I have a very good person that helps me understand and go through the financials, as an individual. And what I've learned is that you have to have that team in place. It isn't a me and me are going to do it all on my own, and that's because I know everything. The reality of it is I'm emotionally attached to this business, and these folks, my team members, are not emotionally attached. They're outside of the business a lot of times, and so they give me good advice when I need it. They also help me understand what I may or may not be seeing, and they ensure that it's getting done right, because in any given day, right? I'm dealing with owners, I'm dealing with guests, I'm dealing with paying vendors, I'm dealing with a lot of different things along with my wife. And, so things get very hectic, and you miss stuff. So I would personally say that if nothing else, it's taught me how to build a team around me so that I know that I'm doing the right things for the business and that it supports me getting successful with that business.
That's a very good point in terms of how, at the end of the day, yeah, it is what it is. The team is the foundation, and if you try to do everything yourself, I mean, there's only so many hours in a day, and also what's the best use of your time becomes more clear. I think the more experience you've had, the more you've gained skills and experience, the more it's clear that, like, your time is worth something, right? And so being very thoughtful as to where you spend that time becomes a consideration as well. Let's talk a little bit about the actual process of, the the acquisitions from a point of view of, there's some steps, right? There's some steps. You start with the deal sourcing. So you start, you want to get into the space. You got to find a company to buy in the first place, right? So how did that deal sourcing uh, happen on your end? How did you go about, identifying potential companies that you could end up buying?
So the first step is really the easy one, and that is and it's and it right it's the it's the easiest but the hardest one, and that's making the decision you're going to do it. And once we got that point, Renee and I got to that point, and we said, okay, let's go through this process. Um, the first thing I started doing was looking at biz buy sell, and that lists all of the different businesses that are for sale across the U.S. And you can go in and put property management in, and it'll tell you every company that's up for sale in the United States that's on that system.
Were there a lot of
What
property
I
management
started,
companies, vacation rental property management companies in
yep,
that site? Really?
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and there's quite a few. They're all over the place. I mean, it's there. Um, what I started doing though is I started giving the I'm interested in this one. I'm interested in that one, even if I wasn't necessarily interested. So, for example, I'm interested in one in Arizona. I don't want to move to Arizona. That's not that wasn't my choice of places, but I was interested in the property management company because of their size, because of something that it told me about them specifically in the description. And then what I would do is I would start getting feedback from those brokers. What ultimately happened is not a single one of those property management companies that I investigated ultimately ended up being the right one. And what I ended up doing is I ended up as I was communicating with these brokers and having these conversations and going through this, and understand it took me a year and a half of conversations back and forth. I finally had a broker call me that said, "Hey, I know you're interested. You and I talked about this other one, but I've got another deal going on. It hasn't been put out there yet. Would you be interested?" And that's how I ultimately got to where I was. And so what I've recommended to other people who've asked me that question is go out and start that conversation with the brokers and start letting them know you're out in the field and you're wanting to look. And what you'll find out is eventually they will call you with a good deal that they don't ever have to advertise. And when it's down to one or two people making the offer versus however many people are looking at that website, it's a much better deal for you as the buyer.
Interesting. And so I guess also from talking with those brokers, you learn a lot about, how they value and what's like it becomes kind of like a learning exercise in and of itself.
Oh yeah, and I learned a ton of information through the conversations, and not so much about property management because a lot of those brokers sell anything from gas
Right.
stations to restaurants to property management companies. But what you learn a lot about is the other side of it, which is the acquisitions. How do I get the loan? Who do I go to get that loan? What are the different things that you can do to get a loan? Um, what do you have to do as far as tax attorneys or CPAs or, all of those types of things that you are all part of the acquisition, but those brokers honestly help you get a lot of good information out of it. So,
Interesting.
and the
And
one
so
good thing
yeah, go ahead.
um, to mention is a lot of the brokers too, like, and I'll give you this example in the state of Florida. It's not like buying a house. You have a real estate agent for yourself and you have a real estate agent for the buyer, and those two communicate. In the state of Florida, a lot of times a business deal is managed by a broker, but he is the deals broker. He doesn't represent me. He doesn't represent the seller. So he can communicate and tell you things. He isn't going to tell you what the lowest number is, just like he won't tell them the highest number, but he can communicate, which gets you a chance to learn a lot more about the area, the business, and a lot about how to do the acquisition properly.
Mm. It's less like us versus them. It's more like, trying to make it work. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you go in, and you must have had a certain decision making criteria, or certain things that you were looking for. Um, Maybe part of that was the geography, but what other what other elements were you kind of like filtering deals based on?
Um, so the first thing you want to look at, obviously, is the geography. Is this a place you want to live and a place you want to work? And I would tell you, be careful with any acquisition where they tell you that the business is able to run by itself. If you're new to the industry, you want to get in there and really learn it and make sure that you know it, and don't allow the business to run by itself. That's the first thing. But the second things you would want to look for too is how many properties are under management? What are those properties? What do they look like? Are they uh, in good properties or condominiums? So are they in a nice neighborhood, or are they in a not so nice neighborhood? Those are, even in tourist towns, you have those issues. Are they in nice condominiums, well kept, or where are they at? The majority of them. You also want to look at how many uh, owners are there. So if you have 50 properties, do you have 50 owners, or do you have 5 owners, or do you have somewhere in between? Um, and the reason for that is if an owner gets upset and he leaves and he takes 10 properties, that's a big chunk of your business. So
Hmm.
you want to be careful that you don't have a lot less owners. You want
Hmm.
a lot more owners in place, so that if they decide to exit the business, which some people will in a transition,
Yeah.
you aren't losing huge chunks of business in there. And then the last thing, or I mean, it isn't the last, but one of the other things I would take a look at is how much money are you making per property at the end of the day? So if you take typically, they will provide an adjusted income statement. And if you put your expected salary in and what you think is going to be a case, you're going to have a profit at the end. What does that look like? How much are you making per property to get to the end? Um, and based off the top to the bottom. So the top number bases the bottom number, because that's going to be a big difference too. And I have seen it range very, very all over the place, from very little money to quite a bit of money. And that also will dictate how much you're going to spend on the business. And
Yeah.
then you're going to also look at the ratio. So they're going to do a multiple, and that multiple is I make X in profits, and I'm going to multiply it times 2, 3, 4%, or sorry, 4 times, and that's going to determine your how much you're going to pay for that business. So that's why you want to make sure you understand how many owners you have, how much each property is making you, because that multiple can impact you pretty significant.
Definitely. So let's look at this one step at a time. I'm curious, because some of the things you're saying, like, how many owners, all those things, they are considerations, part of the due diligence that you have to do at some point. I'm curious, when you're looking at, even wondering whether this is a business that you should do further due diligence on, like, the first criteria, there must be something related to, like, a price range. Like, you must be thinking, okay, I'm gonna buy a business within this price range. Do you go at it with the kind of private equity mindset of, like, "Oh, I'm going to put a ton of leverage on this thing, and so therefore, it's not so much about how much cash is available, you know to actually just pay for the entire business cash, but rather, like, understanding that this is the financing I can get, and therefore, my options are more open." Like, in other words, were you starting from a point of, like, this is what kind of leverage I want to have, therefore this is the kind of business that I can afford? Or were you more kind of like figuring that out as you were having the conversations? You didn't have like a clear, let's say, revenue range or valuation range that you were looking at.
So you're absolutely right. I would say that you need to know that at a very high level, but it does change because the bank can if you decide to leverage or use a loan process versus paying cash for it, the bank will can dictate to you a lot of different things. Um, I'll tell you what, if I could, the one thing I would tell myself today, if I could change everything, is I should have done this much sooner. I always thought I had to have a certain amount of money. I had to have 20% down, and I had to do it in cash, and then 20% could have only given me X amount of dollars. And then you know, then I can go buy, and that's the realm I could have gone in. So my number becomes X, right? Whatever my down payment is at 20%, then that's my number, and that's it. Um, when and this type of business, because typically we are not we don't have any capital associated with the as a property management company. We also don't you can't do a normal um uh conventional loan because you have to have
There's not
collateral.
much collateral. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So the best one to do is SBA 7A, which is the government's loan, and it does not require collateral. So they can give you a loan for no collateral. Um, and they'll do their due diligence on, things that they can work through. But there's so many different aspects of it. So first off, you can do a Rob's IRA, which is taking some of the money that you would have in a retirement, and you can use that as part of the purchase. Those are that can increase the amount of money that you can put down, which allows you to buy a little bit bigger. But instead of investing in Apple or Ford, you're going to invest in yourself, which is a good way to do it as well. The other thing to keep in mind is the seller can also do part of the down payment, and they can give you a seller note. So that could also increase the amount of money. So it's very important to understand what you can do and how much money that you can spend. But it's so varying because of what you have at your disposal versus what's out there. So once you have a general idea what it is, then it's a look at what makes the most sense on the business. And it's
Hmm.
more focused there. Because I'll tell you, I didn't think I had the chance to go buy some of, the first business. And after talking with the banker and after looking at all of that stuff, they were like, oh yeah, here's how you do it. And I mean, I could spend probably 2 hours describing all the things that we had to do, but it makes perfectly good sense. And so understanding that is good, but the banks don't tend to want to talk to you until you have a business in place, and then they have something to work with and they can tell you how to get there. So is that
Interesting. So it's almost like you gotta get the deal first, and then figure out the financing afterwards.
yeah.
You want to have an idea of course, what are your equity sources or your debt sources, but yeah, getting the deal first. That's interesting. And what did you learn about this process in terms of what's unique about financing the acquisition of a property management company versus maybe the way it works in other spaces? You just mentioned one of the things there, which is the fact that the asset here is the management contracts. There's not much collateral, so perhaps that affects loan to values to some degree. What else? What else? Or maybe if you could expand on that further regarding loan to values, but also what else did you learn that's unique about financing an acquisition in this space versus perhaps the way it works in other industries?
So the collateral was probably the biggest thing. The lack of collateral made it really go to SBA 7A is really the only option because the government will allow it to go without collateral. The other thing that was at play is how well the business is done over a 3-year period. So the banks are looking to make sure there is some sort of growth there, or that there is some sort of profits, and that the revenue is a good stream, a good solid stream over 3 years. And they look at it in all businesses like that. They're gonna, if you had a business that's high collateral, they're gonna still look at it that way. But it becomes more and more important in this type of business because they don't have that collateral to back it up. Um, and they do a lot of good things. The banks do a lot of good things in how they manage it, so that you have the ability to be successful. So, for example, one of the things that the SBA loan allows is they also allow you to have working capital. And and keep this in mind when you're buying a property management company, there's there's your monthly expenses that exist, but there's a lot of other expenses that nobody's going to tell you about until you get right into it. For example, paying the OTAs, the online travel agencies, their fair share. Some of them do your annual subscriptions. Some of them do monthly. Some do um, per booking. But when you get annuals, I mean, if you have 30 properties and you do an annual one, that's a pretty expensive chunk of change that's coming out at you. If
Mhm.
you're on beach, there's beach service a lot of times that you do. You have door locks, you have linen fees to if you have your linens. All of those things cost you money, and it's all going to come in late. Unfortunately, my experience is right as you're doing that transition. And so that working capital is very big. So having it in place too is significant. So if you're
Interesting.
going to get a loan from a bank, and that's how I've done it, is you're going to go through making sure you have that working capital as well.
Interesting. And I was just doing some quick research on ChatGPT about this, SBA 7A loan, just so the audience can have this as well as a reference. Seems to be loans amounts up to 5 million. Seems to be typically prime plus 275% as far as interest rates, and loan to values up to 90%. Uh,
Yep.
with regards to working capital, loan to values are typically lower, 75 to 90%. So anyway, it seems like an interesting um, option. They seem to require some personal guarantees as well from whoever has 20% plus of the ownership. So it's just a consideration. Now, let's talk a little bit about what that working capital, because it is so it's a business that is seasonal. There's ups and downs. Cash flow management is very tricky in this space. You've got a lot of money that you receive, but that money is not really yours. so,
Yep.
so it's like you need to be very thoughtful about that, and do proper trust accounting. So on the note of budgeting and just cash flow management and managing your working capital, what could be some of the mistakes that you could see people not having your background making in the way they might run their business here in a vacation rental property management context?
So the first thing is you get that working capital and you think you're doing great, um, because you have now a sum of money that's sitting there. To your point, you're getting a sum of money because you have deposits, advanced deposits that have been given to the previous owner, who they're going to transfer to your account. And in depending upon when we started, depending upon the year when you get going. So in the Fort Walton Destin area, our main season starts in March. And when I took over the first company, I took over in April. And I mean, there was a lot of money there. I'm going to be honest, there between the working capital and the advanced deposits. And there was a lot of opportunity to do the right things and to go through that process and be successful. But to your point, where you can get in trouble very, very quickly is to not have a budget. And what you need to do is to put together a budget. This is what my expenses are. This is what the cost of the building that I'm in. This is if I have vehicles. This is if I have to pay electric and phone and all of those things. Putting those together very quickly, because if you look at my budget as an example, I do very well in March, April, May, June, July, August, September, and all, I do very well there. But as soon as I get into the last part of October, November, December, January, and February, I don't do so well. And I need to save that money through the whole year so that I can cover the backs or all my down season. And where someone coming from the outside of this industry, and I will admit that I had to learn it too, is you got to be prepared. So you may think you have a lot of money. You don't have a lot of money if you don't budget it properly and know what your off season is going to look like. Because that's your on season or your prime season is going to help pay for your off season. And that's a big deal. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. So know that you're gonna have to use those good months to stock up a little bit, so to speak, for the difficult months. That's interesting. Now let's talk a little bit about valuation, right? So we talked about multiples on EBITDA that can range from 2 to 4. Let's say, uh, depending on the volume, right? The more you're buying a larger portfolio, the more you're probably going to pay a higher multiple, just because of the fact that you're aggregating more, you're taking over a larger operation. But within operations of a similar size, let's say small to mid size, what are the different levers that could affect the multiple that you're looking at? What are the different things that could either make that multiple higher or lower? And is this something that in your case, like, did you come in with one valuation, and after due diligence it was the same valuation, or were there things after due diligence that affected the valuation you had in mind?
so let's start with the first part of that question is what could affect that multiple on a hmm, on a same size company or multiple companies that are roughly the same size in the same area. The biggest impact to that multiple is going to be the type of properties that um, the business has. So if the business has a lot of 1 and 2 bedroom condominiums, and their multiples are going to be a lot considerably lower in the scheme of the business versus the same amount of properties in the same area, but they have houses. If they do homes, or if they have a good mix of homes and um, condos, or even if they do a good mix of, I have 3 or 4 one bedrooms, I've got 5 2 bedrooms, I've got 6 3 bedrooms, I've got some homes that are 6 and 7 bedroom. If they do a good mixture, and so where they are covering a lot more of the clientele and the guest expectations, those multiples are going to be much higher for you. And the reason is because they give that, and you will see it too in the revenue. They will make more money. The ones who have diversified is going to see more money, and they're going to have much more profits at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Okay.
um,
What about the contracts, the management contracts? What Like, for example, the fact that a contract is transferable might make you be willing to pay more, versus if you have to draft a new contract and then there's the risk of losing the owner throughout the transition. What other things like that would you say you were looking for as part of your due diligence in the management contracts to determine the multiple?
So, quite frankly, most of the contracts, at least in the ones that I have evaluated, are all transferable.
Okay.
Most of the property managers will make them transferable. It's a line item in it, so they can move. I have seen one or two where they didn't, but those I I stayed away from those honestly because you need something that is transferable to the newest owner. Um, it it matters in that not so much as whether or not the contract is transferable, but more so if the owners have been with the company long. The longer they've been with the company, so let's say the company's been is 10 years old, and you have most of the owners, 75, 80% of the owners have been with the company since day one, or roughly, 10 years, 9 years, those longer ones, less likely of them moving. They're going to give you a chance to be successful as long as you're not changing things significantly. So if you're looking at if you're looking at a property management company that has a lot of brand new owners, um, that changed my evaluation of the company significantly because
Hmm.
that concerned me that 50% of all of the properties are brand new owners, that if I come in and take over, those owners have learned how to switch. They'll switch on you much easier. Um,
Hmm.
if they don't feel comfortable with the fact that you have new ownership.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And that also, leads me to the question about buying buying assets versus there's two ways. I can't remember what was the second one. There's assets that you can buy, and what's this, or contracts, right? So what's the difference between buying assets, buying contracts, and what are the pros and cons?
So that's so contract or assets. Let's go with the assets first. The assets would be buying the business as a whole. So the owner has a building that they lease. They have a couple cars. They have they have the employees or the team members that are there that manages it. So you might have couple cleaning crews, or a maintenance guy, or guest relations, or property manager. So you're buying all of that, and those are good businesses, and that's the direction that I went in. The other option is buying contracts, and that is where the company, for whatever reason, let's say they're a real estate company and they don't, they want to keep their real estates, but they've also done a little bit of property management, and they have 5 contracts that that will be sold, or they want to sell off and turn over to someone else. Those are, you're not really buying the people, you're not buying operations, you're not buying the software, nothing. You're buying strictly a contract, and it's just being added into what you already have. In both cases, they are both very, very positive, and in both cases, they have their own individual negative. So, in an acquisition where you're buying assets, you get what you get, and you're going to have to deal with, um, the employees. You may end up with great employees. You may end up with not so great employees. You may not be in the best of locations. You may um, not have the operations may not have the best name in the area. The brand may not be good for whatever reasons. So you have to look through and be a part of your due diligence to see um, what's their ratings on Google, and what are people saying about them, and going out and looking at their reviews, and going through that type of stuff. In a contract case, you're not buying any of that stuff, so it's easy. But the problem with the contracts is that you also risk losing those owners. Those owners may not appreciate being sold. They may not appreciate being told you're now going with this person, whether you like it or not. And so they may switch on you quicker. So where a multiple of, as I mentioned, 2 to 4 times on a asset acquisition, on a contract, the contracts that I've seen and have bidded on is always a multiple in the opposite direction. So let's say that, as an example, the contract is worth $10,000 a year in income. I may only pay 2,000, 3,000 for a contract. I'm not going to pay that going into an acquisition. But I will also tell you that in a contract, I will also pull that. I will purchase those contracts closer to peak season. I will not try to purchase them at the end of season. Peak season, there's already um, bookings. The owner's not going to want to switch because they could lose all those bookings, and you're buying those bookings, but the owner's less likely to switch and at least gives you a season to prove yourself. Where if you do it at the end of season, they have a much higher chance of exiting. In an acquisition, those are, you can, purchase those anytime. You're going to deal with that process no matter what across an acquisition situation.
Interesting. And I guess that leads to also the topic of earnouts and whether you should have earnouts or not in terms of paying the seller based on retention of those contracts after the transition is over, which is also something that I guess could affect the multiples you decide to pay in a way, right? Because if you're like negotiating with a seller and they and they don't want an earnout, maybe that's like, maybe you offer a higher multiple in exchange for the earnout, so it's kind of like fair for both sides. I don't know, I'm just speculating here. But yeah, what would you say about that? We have about 2 more minutes to go.
Yeah. So very quickly on that one, I will tell you from my point of view, and I don't call them earnouts. We call them clawbacks. That's how I address them. And what it is that for every, I will offer the amount of money for the business, and at that point in time, for every property lost in a span of time, so that could be 3 months, 6 months, whatever you agree to. If you lose a property, that could be an X amount of dollars given back to me or reducing the total cost. I have had a situation where I was negotiating and the seller would not go to that. I turned the whole deal down. And the reason is because owners will move. There is no question about it. It is a fact of our business that I don't care. I mean, how big, how good, how successful you are, owners move in our business no matter what. Now adding on a fact that you're a brand new owner just makes them uneasy. So I wanted a way to get some of that money back if I lost it. And generally speaking, it's normally what that property is worth to the business. So I would not negotiate with someone who didn't want to do it, because I also felt like if the previous owner or the seller is willing to do that clawback concept, then they're willing to help me be successful. Where if they didn't, I felt like they were hiding something that I wasn't willing to
It's
risk.
a red flag. Definitely. That makes sense. That's a good point. Well, listen, Gene, this has been super, super insightful. Thanks so much for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it. All the insights, all the lessons. I took some notes. Hopefully the audience did as well. And yeah, it was great to have you on, and really, really appreciate all the insights. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.